And certainly you see it a lot in sports where they win a championship in whatever sport one year, and where are they the next year?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I really started to learn about is, okay, how can we get to a high level? But then the next challenge as a leader is how do you maintain and stay at a high level, which is easier said than done. And what I really learned is that when you get to a high level, when we won a championship, okay, how we're going to repeat. And the two things that I teach leaders now is, one, you got to keep growing. If you stay the same, people fly by you. And secondly, you really got to work with your people and build relationships and teach them how to grow and lead themselves and keep improving.
Let's repeat the non-conformist oath. I promise to be different. I promise to be unique. I promise not to repeat things other people say.
Welcome back to Positive Blatherings, once again in the Ember Studio here at Rockbox Recording and Production in beautiful downtown Bushnell's Basin. And my guest today, I've been going back and forth on the LinkedIn for quite some time to coordinate this conversation, and we finally were able to have our schedules meet. And I'm really excited to bring Coach Jim Johnson onto the podcast. Welcome back, or welcome here, not welcome back, but in my mind I'm saying welcome back.
Right. Scott, it's great to see you. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So you are a coach. You are an author. You are a public speaker. You are a leader. You're a leadership expert. All of these cool things. But I wanted to get into where that started. Like, when was the first time that you realized, hey, I can actually lead people and they listen and they follow?
Good question. I would say a lot of it had to do with my father, because my father was actually my high school basketball coach. Of course, I had big dreams like a lot of kids that I thought I was going to play in the NBA, but then when I got cut from my college basketball team, I guess I decided that was probably not the path I was going to be able to take. But then I really wanted to follow my dad's footsteps. And interesting, after he coached me, he actually went into administration. And in fact, I kid him because I have 3 younger brothers and none of them got a chance to play for him. And I thought I would do that path as well, Scott. But when I started coaching, my first head coaching job was at Churchville Chili High School, and it was a very humbling experience. We lost 17 games in a row. And it was a real struggle, and they actually let me go after 1 year. So it was a pretty humbling start. But fortunately, I got back on my feet. I got a mentor named Bill Van Gundy that ironically coached at GCC. And
I recognize that name. I've heard that name quite a bit.
And both his sons have ended up being head coaches in the NBA. But Coach Van Gundy took me under my wing. And then I got an opportunity to coach at a smaller school called Leroy, and did that for 2 years. And that's when I really started to understand, because when I first got into leading, I thought it was all about basketball, the X's and O's and teaching the skills. And that's certainly a part of it. You got to be an expert in your field if you're going to be a leader. But then my eyes really were opened up to the fact that I had to study leadership, and I became a personal growth junkie. I started to listen to not only basketball people, but a lot of the, I'm showing my age, but the icons of personal growth like Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn, and Tony Robbins is still alive, and Brian Tracy and many, many others. And I really figured out that if I was going to be a better coach, I had to be a better leader. And so I became infatuated with leading. And in my last 27 years, I became a head coach in my hometown. Ironically, I went to Greece Arcadia. I ended up being the head coach at Greece Olympia for 7 years, and we were fortunate to turn that program around. And then my last 20 years, we had a really good run in Athena. And that's where I really started to improve as a leader, and fortunately, we had a lot of success. But I think it really starts with you understanding what it takes to be a leader, and you have to be a student of leadership because it's always evolving as it is today. Yeah,
when I was a kid, or like I said, when I was in high school, my training is actually in radio. I ended up working in video for most of my career, but my brother, my older brother, he's 11 years older than me. He also wanted to be in radio.
Okay.
So when I was in high school, he was just starting out in the radio field, and he ended up becoming a general contractor and not even working in radio.
Okay.
But the radio station that he worked for in Pompano Beach, Florida was called WWNN, the Winners News Network.
Okay.
And the Winners News Network used to play, they didn't play music, they just played clips from people like Ziglar, Tony Robbins, like all of the great leadership folks.
Okay.
And so I used to love to come to the station because I wanted to be in radio too. So I was watching him, do his thing and get on the mic and push the buttons. But we weren't listening to music. We were listening to all these motivational speakers and talking about, and so it's just interesting because I think back of in those times and when other people were listening to music, I was always listening to the Winners News Network on 980, or I think it was 980 AM or something like that.
Okay.
And which was a little strange for a 15-year-old
kid. For sure.
But it really made a big difference in my later life. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of interesting how sometimes, and I want you to maybe talk a little bit about this, how sometimes something that you learn early on sometimes lies dormant, and then suddenly it pops back up and you're like, and it all clicks and you're like, oh, all that stuff that I listened to all those times, that all makes sense. Now I know what they were talking about. Does that happen a lot?
Yeah, I think it does as you continue your journey of study. It's funny, little things that I picked up from various, and Jim Rohn was probably my all-time favorite. And I remember him talking about if you wanted to be wealthy, study wealth. And when I started listening to him, I was not wealthy at all. And I was like, wow, that makes sense. And then I used that statement in leadership. If you want to be a great leader, you got to study leadership. So as simple as that sounds, I think sometimes we ignore the fact that because leadership is such a challenging subject, that if you don't consistently learn about it and try to improve every day, then you usually fall behind. So. What
would you say is probably the biggest challenge that you've come across in leadership?
I believe, because I was a high school basketball coach for 35 years and a head coach for 30, was the thing that I learned, but it took a while, was the fact that, because you hear in the music industry, the one-hit wonder. And certainly you see it a lot in sports where they win a championship in whatever sport one year, and where are they the next year?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I really started to learn about is, okay, how can we get to a high level? But then the next challenge as a leader is how do you maintain and stay at a high level, which is easier said than done. And what I really learned is that when you get to a high level, when we won a championship, okay, how we're going to repeat. And the two things that I teach leaders now is, one, you got to keep growing. If you stay the same, people fly by you. And secondly, you really got to work with your people and build relationships and teach them how to grow and lead themselves and keep improving. Because what happens is a natural thing is when you reach a high level in one year, the tendency is not to work as hard the next year, and that's what happens.
Yeah, resting on your laurels.
Exactly.
One of my first professional jobs, my boss at the time, he was one of the people, he led by fear. Mm-hmm. And when I was in high school, I was in the Civil Air Patrol, and I was really, really wanted to be in the military. I used to teach leadership classes to the younger cadets and stuff like that, and really enjoyed that. And I remember one thing that always stuck with me about leadership is lead by respect and example. Mm-hmm. So if you want people to do something, you have to be prepared to be able to do it and say, well, I'm not going to ask you to do something that I wouldn't be able to do myself. And that's the one thing that my old boss was always like, we were always saying, he's making us do it because he doesn't know how. Mm. And I know that does not, doesn't get very far,
right?
In the respect level or anything like that. If you have an employer or leader that is like that, you're like, I don't really want to go that extra mile for this person. What was one of the first times that you saw how leading, how respect affects the relationship from a leader to, would you say a follower? And a follower, yes, but I'm trying to when you say follower, to me, it seems like a follower and a leader. It almost feels degrading when you say you're a follower,
right.
You know? But that's not what I mean.
Right. It's an interesting point because I believe that, when I grew up, two of the highly successful coaches, and they were very different in style in basketball at the college level, was John Wooden and Bobby Knight. And so, and I thought when I got in, that I was going to be this hardcore, and everything's my way or the highway. And as I really became a better student of leadership, I realized that the key to leadership is certainly character and competence. You got to know what you're doing, and you got to be someone they can build trust is. But the huge thing is, I kid people. I spoke at a leadership conference for educators, and I kidded them that 3 hours in leadership for education and in leadership in general is not reading, arithmetic, and writing. It's relationships. And so the ability to build relationships is something that I really focused on the second half, and it certainly manifested in how much better we did with our success rate on the court. So I think that's the huge thing is building relationships. And one of the things that I think is a little bit unique that I challenge leaders when I do a leadership presentation is that I'll ask them, how many of you believe that you need to build trust with your team members and your customers or clients? And it's 100% every place I travel in the country. But then I kind of challenge them and I give them a little curveball. I said, well, how many of you have an intentional leadership plan on how you're going to build or intentional trust plan, how are you going to build trust? And they kind of look at me and then I share, we have a 3-point plan that when we took over programs, how we're going to build trust. And one of the huge things is, going back to you talk about leading by example, is we always told our players, you are always on stage. People are always watching you. As the leader, I was the head of the program, they're always watching me. And I'll give you a quick little story, Scott. Early in my career at Athena, my last stop, one of the things that I wanted to have a first-class program. So when we would travel on the road, I would expect our players to have shirt and ties. In one game, I didn't wear a shirt and tie. And I'll never forget, we got back to the school, and I was walking back to my car, and one of our parents said, Coach, you always talk about the importance of leading by example. You expect our sons to wear ties. How come you don't have a tie on? And I thought for a moment. I said, "You're absolutely right, and that won't happen again." And from then, I always wear a shirt and tie because that's the power of leading by example.
Yeah, and I remember as a younger man seeing the Miami Dolphins and the Florida Marlins when they were going to away games or something. We'd see them at the airport and we'd see them getting on the planes, and they were always dressed up real nice. And I asked my dad, I'm like, why are they all dressed? You would think these are ball players, they'd be in shorts or whatever, ball caps and stuff. And my dad's like, you know how much money they make? He's like, they need to always be presenting that successful image no matter where they go. And a lot of the clubs, if not all of them, have that as a rule. When you're out in the public, when you're traveling as part of the team, you look presentable, you look professional. Yeah, exactly. And it's a huge factor of, I know when I first started working on my own, and some other people that I know that have their own businesses, they're like, hey, I don't have to wear a tie to work. I don't have to, I can wear shorts and stuff like that. I was like, yeah, you can, but I like to come in here and at least dress business casual. I'm not going to wear a tie when I'm not going to see anybody throughout the day, but I still believe in that presentation of says a lot about you, who you are, and your position in the office. Right. And I know that I've worked with people in the past that always came in dressed really nice, well put together, even if they weren't in leadership or in management or anything like that. Right. And not to anyone's big surprise, they ended up there. Right. Because that's how they were viewed, and and top of mind. One of the managers would say, "Hey, let's give this guy a shot. He's always well put together. He looks professional." It's interesting. I heard this comment once because I've become a leadership junkie, or a podcast junkie, I should say. And I heard this podcast host say, and he said, "You're interviewing for your next job by your conduct each day."
And I was like, wow, that's pretty powerful. And it's exactly what you were saying. It's very true. People are going to recognize, how do you present yourself every day? Do you have a great work ethic or not so good? So
yeah. And you never know. You never know who it could be. The person you run into at Wegmans. Yeah. It could be anywhere. It could be someone on the street. Right. And you don't know when that impression is going to change your life.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, and that's, I think, one of the most exciting things about life in general, especially for some reason. So I grew up in South Florida, if you haven't caught those hints. So I'm not a native from Rochester, but I feel like I am. I feel that this town is my home. And there's something about Rochester that I just absolutely fell in love with. And one thing is how small of a town this is. It's a medium-sized city, I guess you could say. But it's a very small town. It still has that small town feel.
It does.
And especially within your own industry. So I'm sure all, if not most, of the trainers and coaches and stuff that are in town. Just like I'm in production, I know a lot of the production people in town, and we all move in the same circles. And even though there may be some competition, there's also a lot of camaraderie.
Right.
And I really love that. I love that about this town, because down in Florida it was really cutthroat.
Was it?
It was like, you don't make friends with people in your industry because they're gonna steal your job. They're gonna take the next gig from you.
Right.
Whereas here, there's a little bit there. You think about that, but then at the same time, someone's recommending you for a position or for a job or a gig or something, and it's the person that you are actually in competition with, but they can't do it or whatever,
Right, exactly.
And they think of you.
Yeah.
I love stories like that.
Yes, that's very well said, and that's why I think the power of relationships and staying in touch with people. Like, one of the things that I learned, I started doing a few years ago, is sending personal videos to people. And it could be like a happy birthday. It could be just
like the cameos.
Yeah, little cameos. like 15 to 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But just checking in, or seeing, or maybe they did something that I heard about. You compliment them. Like, of one of my former players, I just saw on Facebook his mother passed away, so I sent him a video. And that kind of thing. Because I don't get the newspaper anymore, so I don't see, like I used to always look at the obituaries, but now I don't do that.
Does anybody get the newspaper anymore?
Not many.
Well, that's a really commendable touch, and a very personable touch that I think more people should do.
Yeah.
It's it takes you what?
Yeah, a very brief time.
A few minutes.
And the person that gave me that advice, it made a lot of sense to me. He said, because he said to me, videos are real big now. And I said, I agree. He said, but how many times do you get a personal video? And I said, very rarely. I was like, so, yeah, it made a lot of sense. Because, always saying, how can you distinguish yourself in the marketplace, right? Doing something a little bit different that might be a little unique. And those are little things that you can do. The other thing, just simple things that I was very good and I got away from it. And I'm really trying to bring that back is, like sending notes of congratulation or thank you notes. And that means a lot to people. I remember reading a story about this guy, Doug Conant, that was head of Campbell's Soup, and every Friday he would write out multiple thank you notes. And then Campbell's Soup was huge, so he'd go around the country, and he was amazed how many people had that thank you note on their desk or up on their bulletin board. That's the power of that. People, it means a lot.
I agree, and I'm always amazed when I get not just an email, an actual card, a handwritten, hand addressed card to you that says thank you. I do some work. I work for the Amerks. Part-time job working in the production, and our manager sends out after every season handwritten cards to all of us. That's great. To the whole team. Yeah. And I think that's a nice touch.
Yeah, absolutely.
It definitely brings that cohesion to the team.
Without doubt.
I wanted to go back to when you were totally slipped out of my mind. I wanted to go back to when you were talking about wow. Okay. I'm going to cut this part out. What advice do you have for someone who is just starting out and they're thinking about becoming a coach? What would you tell them right now, as based on how things are now in your industry?
Well, my industry, because, coaching comes in a lot of phases. You talk about I've hired coaches for fitness. I've hired coaches for my speaking. So, but, me, I was an athletic coach. And, when you're doing it at the high school level, number one is you want to be a head coach? Are you doing it for the right reasons? And the right reasons to me is because you love the sport and you want to make a positive impact with young people in building relationships. Because as an athletic coach, people will remember you either positively or negatively in the impact you made. Because that was what I really enjoyed is I picked a sport that I loved. So I really studied the sport. But I also became a people studier. I started to learn about the various different people and how, for example, I talk about doing specific praise with people. But you got to get to know your people, because some people I could criticize in front of the whole team, and it was a great lesson, and that person could accept it. There were other people I couldn't do that to them, or that would blow them up. So then, I had to critique them maybe in a one-on-one meeting. Mm-hmm. So I say number one is are you in it for the right reasons? Do you have a love for sports in young people? In my case, working with high school players. And then thirdly is you need to continue to grow as a leader and consistently find ways to build great relationships. Because what you forget is what an amazing impact you can make as a coach in a high school sport, for sure.
That's true. I wasn't a sports kid growing up. I was a band kid. Mm-hmm. I did play JV football. Okay. And that was fun, but I wasn't big enough to continue on, and those kids were getting bigger and bigger every year, and I was staying the same height. Yeah. But I know that the difference that whether they were a coach or a teacher or something in that position made a huge difference to me growing up. And there's a lot of responsibility for that. Like, you really have a lot of responsibility with young people, and it's admirable for someone like you to, that's why you're doing it, because you want to make a difference to young people. And I think today you're even more important. Mm-hmm. How much, and you could probably, do an entire new episode just on this question. How much has it changed? Do you think about when you got into it 35, 40 years ago to now? I know that there's some principles that stay consistent throughout there, like universals, but some other things and a lot of things have changed in dealing with kids. What are some of the things that you notice that really stick out?
I'd say the number one thing is how much the family structure changed. When I first started, it was mostly 2-parent homes and that kind of thing. And the trend was, obviously our divorce rate is pretty high in our country. So, a lot of single parents, mostly mothers, but, sometimes just a father. The other thing is, you go through the different trends, like the helicopter parents, where their son, in my case, because I coach boys most of the part, could do nothing wrong, no matter what they did, and, not taking responsibility. I can tell you a quick story that was a real positive. When I was at Olympia, so this is a while ago, but 2 parents, they had 2 sons that ended up playing basketball for me, and I'll never forget, they were both on the varsity. One was a senior, one was a sophomore. And our rule was we shot free throws in the mornings of games, and you had to be there by 7 a.m. And they walked in at like 7:03, and they didn't start. And I'll never forget, because I saw the dad the next day, and I'm like, oh boy, he's going to tear into me. And he goes, Coach, I want to thank you. And I was like shocked. I go, thank me? He goes, that's such a great lesson you taught my sons. I'll tell you, they'll never be late again. And they weren't. So it's those are the little things that you remember, the positive. But I think the parenting situation is made it more difficult. And I would say the other thing that's really important, going back, I know I'm being a little redundant, but I don't see coaches staying in as long, and I think it's because they're getting in for the wrong reasons. And the right reason is because you really love the sport and you love young people. You want to make an impact on them. And if you don't have the right reasons, that famous why Simon Sinek talked about, then I think that's where you can struggle.
Yeah, that has got to be difficult for someone to put a lot of, energy into a career to only find out 15 years later that this isn't what they want to do.
Right. Yeah.
That's really hard for some. And then but I will say, for those that do get out of it, it's a good thing that they do, so that they don't take those bad feelings, into the job and make everyone else miserable because they're unhappy with where they are.
Exactly.
What would you say to someone who's in that position, who regardless of industry, who is maybe not so happy with their job and not so happy with their life? What advice would you give them to make a change?
I think it starts with self-assessment. And so, just taking some time to reflect and saying, understand what you're doing right now. Is this really your purpose in life? And if not, think about it and say, it made me make a time to change. There's no right or wrong answer. It's different for every person. But I think it really does start with your purpose, your mission in life. One of the things I encourage leaders is to create a personal mission statement. Like, I have a personal mission statement. Mine was to be an outstanding role model that makes a positive difference in the world by helping others make their dreams come true. And so that's what, why I stayed in coaching so much, because I always thought I could help young people make their dreams come true, in various things, and making the impact, is always great afterwards when I would have a player invite me to their wedding or that kind of thing. Those are really, cool things about coaching that you don't get in a lot of different professions. So I believe, but I think it really comes down to you doing some self-reflection. And, we talked about coaching. Sometimes it's important to hire people that can help you, coaching, whether it's a life coach or whatever, really to help, because it's good sometimes to get an outsider's perspective. Yeah. And, the last thing I'll say is being a constant learner. Continue to find ways to feed your mind and figure out, what's best for you. It's funny because, I was part of the JMAC story, which got me into speaking, which I never thought I was going to be a speaker. And then, now I love speaking, and, I've made that a study now. I want to be the best speaker I can be. So, you do have changes in your life and things happen that, you might get another career path, and that's okay. But when you do, make sure you strive to be the best you can be in it.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, talk about JMAC, and I worked for a company called SE Video back in the day, and we were shooting those games. Yeah. And I remember when they came back with it, and with that footage, and then it was on the news. Yeah. It was pretty amazing. Yeah. It was pretty cool. Yeah. Do you, thinking of the past, thinking of early on in your career, do you remember the first time that so you said that was, what was that, 2009?
6. We just had our 20-year anniversary.
Was it 2006?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, February 15th of 2006.
Wow. Okay, so thinking back to then, do you, walk me through the first time that you actually had a big speaking gig and you were talking to a lot of people, and what was going on through your mind and how you dealt with that?
That's a really good question, because the first speech I had where I actually got paid after that season was ironically to a school that focused on students on the autism spectrum. It was in Delaware. And the funny thing is, Scott, they asked me to speak for 90 minutes. Now, I'd never done a professional speech other than some talks in basketball.
Did you say 90?
90 minutes. And I was like, and fortunately, it went pretty good. And they had a Q&A. And, of course, it was only like 6 weeks after the game. So, it was pretty fresh in everybody's mind. So it went pretty good. But as I started to gain some momentum in speaking, then I realized that I had to develop a message, okay? Because I had this neat story to share with people, and it was inspirational. So my first speech was called Dreams Really Do Come True, and I shared 6 keys to help people make their dreams come true. And that gave me some momentum. And, I did that part-time because I coached for 10 more years after that game. And when I retired in 2016 to speak full-time, because I loved leadership and how to build team culture, so I now do a leadership presentation that I've been doing for a number of years, about a decade. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I started one on how to build championship team culture that I'll do for both business leaders and educational leaders as well. So it's been fun. And, the one thing about speaking is not only understanding the art of speaking. Like I joined the National Speakers Association, so I've met some of the top speakers in the world, and I've hired some of them as coaches, and I've learned various things. But the other thing is almost like being a comedian in the sense that you're trying to always look out for little stories that you can add because people remember stories. As I used to kid my priest. I'm a practicing Catholic, and he brought me in to help some of the deacons on their homilies. And after a few of them, there were like 10 of them. They each did like a 5-minute sermon. And after about 3 or 4 of them, I said, "What's Jesus Christ known for?" And of course, they're not knowing where I'm going to go with this. And I said, well, one of the things he was known for is he's a master storyteller. And why are you not sharing a story? Because people remember stories. And I think that's something I really learned, how to become a better storyteller.
Yeah, I agree with you about stories. I mean, that's the business that I'm in right now. Is in late 2017, I had a unique opportunity to start this business based on someone else's business who was closing up, and I was able to take over that business. And I thought, well, what else can we do that would be an additional revenue stream? And I was like, oh, maybe we'll put together a podcast studio. And a lot of people were laughing at me. They're like, who's going to podcast? And then it just, especially after the pandemic and everything changed. And it's over the last 8 years that I've really become to just be amazed by the power of storytelling.
Yeah.
And how... And you're right. You can go in front of people and you can give them facts and figures and everything, but none of that really clicks. But when you tell them a story that applies those messages, then it's incredible.
And one of the things I teach leaders is I say, you got to be the CST, the chief storyteller. And one of the things, like I used to tell my players stories all the time, and I broke them into 2 categories: warnings and examples. Like I might bring up, obviously it was a lot with basketball, but I might bring up an NBA player and say, this guy's a great player, but how come his team never wins? When we just have a discussion about that, we'll share a story about, something I saw about him, and then we discuss it. And then maybe a week later I'll say, this guy also is a pretty good player, but his team always wins. What's the difference? When we have a discussion and tell a story about it. So, having those examples in a positive way and the warnings of what you probably shouldn't do is really powerful because people remember those. Yeah.
And that's what my whole thing about management and leadership in a job as an employer is everything that I do is based on the opposite of what my very first boss did. Because it was such a bad experience that I think about, all right, well, I'm not going to do that because that's what he did to me. And I remember how I felt, and I don't want to be that way. So it's it's just kind of interesting that's what I've been doing all these years, is just doing the opposite of what I learned early on. How do you deal?
I was just going to say, that's a great point because I've had some really good mentors and some people that, you take some things away from everybody, but some of them is definitely not what to do as opposed to as well as what to do.
Right. And the lesson is still there. It's just a different kind of lesson.
Exactly.
What do you, so let's say you're hired by XYZ Corp and they want you to help create a more cohesive team, like their management team. Right. And you got one manager who's just a total prima donna. This guy or girl, thinks they don't smell and all that, all those good. Right. So how do you approach that? What's the first thing that you do in order to sort of conquer that?
Yeah, it's a great question because as a speaker, I think really a key is the pre-call. So the call before you are brought in, with whoever is bringing you, and sometimes it's one person, sometimes it's a few people, and that's where I know I'm an acronym guy. I think I got that from being an educator, but is being the CQA, the chief question asker. And one of the things I just list out questions like, tell me about your culture, and then just sit and listen. What are the things that are going really well for you right now? On the other side, what are you struggling with? And that's where you get some things. You might say, well, exactly what you said. We have this one leader that's a real prima donna, and so what you're trying to do with your message, like I have keys that I do with how to build championship culture, and we'll talk about the keys. But then I'll bring up some stories that will illustrate and share. Like, again, I might share a story of a leader that I learned from that was a warning, and maybe trying to hit that person to say.
So you just kind of weave them in.
Weave them in, exactly.
And not necessarily, straight out say it.
Right. So, and it depends on, what I would ask them, is that something I should call this person out? And they may say, oh, no. Or they might say, yeah, if you can do it in a subtle way,
Right.
And so, those are the things you're trying to figure out and when you're trying to really customize your message.
And that whole idea of customizing is very interesting because you really do. You said it earlier, early in this conversation where everybody's different and people respond differently to different things. And so that's got to make you very an astute people reader. Mm-hmm. And a room reader. You can sit and I've seen this happen with a lot of people who some people can't read the room and they're like,
right.
Why would you tell that story in this crowd?
Yeah. And
other people just nail it. And I've always been amazed at how people can do that. What are some of the tools that you're using to sort of stay pliable in your field and maybe some of the new voices that are coming out that you're looking into or something like that? Because I know everything's changing and things change, but you got to stay fresh and you got to apply new ideas and stuff like that. How do you do that?
Well, I always share with people that I think you should have an intentional personal growth plan. So that I take a lot of pride in personal growth. So I'm always trying to learn what's going on. Although I'm very aware of AI and how it's changing the world, and I do use it, and our team uses it, but it's not something I've chose to be an expert in. So I would not do a speech on AI, but I must be aware of it because it's a big trend right now. And there are some things that are going to be real fundamentals that are going to stay constant. Like building trust is going to be a constant, whether it's in 2026 or probably 2066. Mm-hmm. And it was important in 1980 as well. So, but there's also things that you got to be aware of, like upgrading a more personal story that maybe happened to you more recently, or and just some things you observe, or like one of the things I talk to, like I do how to be a more powerful presenter. I usually do it to young leaders and college students and sometimes high school classes. And one of the things I talk to them about is the power of the opening. And, I give them a few ideas. Like one is to start with a story. Like I start with a video because it's a JMac video and it's pretty powerful. But another way is start with a staggering statistic. Like, if you're talking about the ills of smoking cigarettes, you might say, did you know that 80% of smoking cigarettes causes lung cancer? Right. If you know an accurate stat, that draws in the people's attention right there. So those are things you're trying to, and also, like, when I'm hired by a company or, a school or whatever, I want to know as much about the company, what's going on about them, or how is the school culture? I want to know as much as I can so I can hit those points that are going to be able to help them.
Yeah, there's something that always affects me, when I see somebody go up on stage, and when I see them lose the crowd, mm-hmm. and then you sometimes you can pinpoint that exact second where they lose the crowd and they kind of drift off, and I can't deal with that. Like I have to leave the room.
Right.
It's really difficult for me to watch that happen, and I feel bad for the person and stuff like that. Early on, have you ever felt that you lost the room, and what kind of advice did you give someone to get it back?
Yeah. Definitely have more early in my career, but certainly it's so I believe the more you become a student of how to be a more effective speaker. So a couple tips I give people. One is use the power of the pause. When I first started, Scott, I had all this content, and I wanted to speak 90 million miles an hour. And, I have some, funny things in there, but I wouldn't even let the audience laugh, because I had to get on to the next thing. And you realize that, as you say something that a lot of times gets a laugh, pause and let the people laugh. Or another thing is ask questions, challenging questions, a rhetorical question. Like, have you ever felt really in a difficult leadership position? How did you feel? And then pause and let them think about it. And then also I will do, depending on the length of my keynote, is I'll do some activities, partner activities. I have a group activity to illustrate culture and, getting the people involved, because it's hard to just speak for 90 straight minutes.
Oh, yeah.
So you got to be able to break it up. And so those are a few of the keys that I talk about, is the power of pause, the ability to ask questions, get people to think, and then audience involvement with some activities.
It's funny because I think about when I was in radio, and if you think about how long's a minute? A minute's nothing.
Yeah.
But when you have to fill a minute and you don't have anything to say, it's a terribly long minute.
Yeah.
It takes a long time, and you're like, oh my God, it's only been 15 seconds. What am I going to do? Yeah, that's real. I like the power of the pause.
I did a speech recently to a autism group in North Carolina. I spoke at their fundraising dinner, and most of my keynotes, Scott, are now between 45 and 90 minutes. And as you talked about at the beginning or early on, when you about how long a speech is. And I remember early on, it's like the quicker the better for me. Well, they asked me to speak for 15 minutes. And it was a great challenge for me, but it really was very helpful because it really showed my economy of words and what I should take out. And it was a powerful lesson for me, especially as you got much more comfortable speaking for 60 to 90 minutes.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up, because we were doing a project recently, and it was for a TV show, and the host had to interview, the guest, and we had a whole list of parameters that we had to fill, and it was like you had to ask 6 questions, and the answers could only be 45 seconds long.
Okay.
And I'm like, and I thought about that, and I was like, it's very, very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. And you say using, economy of words, it's very, very difficult to just answer that question in, 45 seconds.
Right.
When you have so much to say and you want to go on, and we're like, we're going to have to cut 95% of what you just said because we only need this much. It's really, really hard.
It is hard. Yeah.
What would you say is describe for me your ideal client? Who's your ideal person to work with or group?
So the two that jump right out to me would be, and it's interesting because, I was part of a story about autism, the young man that had autism, yet I haven't spoke a lot in the autism world, which actually is a little bit disappointing because I really do enjoy, and Jason and I still have a great relationship. But to answer your question specifically, because I'm so into leadership, so the two that I love to speak to are leadership teams from businesses in leadership and education, whether it's, high school leadership, school superintendents, those kinds of things.
So specifically administrative, people working in leadership.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. I have you heard of when what is it, 3 or 4 years ago, I got a client and we were doing their podcast, the Center for Serving Leadership. And I never knew what serving leadership was. Are you familiar with that, the servant leader?
Yeah, so that is actually one of my keys, as I call it, servant leadership, and that's something I started to study and really embraced a lot the second half of my career. And one thing I define servant leadership is the ability to do 2 things. It flips the traditional pyramid of leadership, where leadership was on top of the pyramid and all the people were under him or her. But the other side of it is the ability to build relationships so that you build trust, and that I think the best servant leadership is not soft leadership. It's they understand the boundaries, they understand the core values, they understand the mission. And, I know I'm using another acronym, but I believe effective leaders are the CROs, the Chief Reminding Officers. So you got to live the message and share the message consistently. And that's why, developing other stories and share the message a little bit different, still with that key point that you want to make day in and day out is so important, and so that you share that message consistently. And the one things I talk about in building trust is you need to align your words and actions. I mean, how many times maybe this was that you said you had a leader that you couldn't stand because he or she did everything wrong, and a lot of it was probably because they would say one thing and do another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost when you're a parent, you say, "Do as I say, not as I do."
Right, exactly.
Because I said so.
Yes,
that's why you need to do it.
Yeah.
So what's on the horizon for you and for your? So do you have a team of people that you work with?
I have a very small team. I have they're all part-time. I have a manager that actually in Florida that I met when I was at a national speakers conference a number of years ago. Her name is Kate. She's wonderful. I've been working with her over a decade. I do a podcast with your friend John Gehring called the Limitless Leadership Lounge. We've been doing that 5 years. It's to help young and emerging leaders because the genesis was that I got fired from my first coaching job at 25, so I wanted to give back to young and emerging leaders. So that's something, and I've written a couple books. In fact, I brought a couple gifts for you. So,
cool!
I have a book about the J. Mac story called "A Coach in a Miracle," and then it's called "Lessons from Thought Leaders," and it's about. I have a chapter in that with my 7 leadership keys that I share. So, and I'm still doing the speaking. I'm going to the National Speakers Conference in July, and I'll get a chance to meet a lot of the friends I've made in the speaking world. So that's always fun as well.
That's great. So then I guess that's a good point or a good time to how do people get a hold of you if they want to talk to you about leadership? Yeah,
so probably the easiest way is my website, CoachJimJohnson.com. That way I wouldn't forget it. And with that, I have a free weekly blog. In fact, I just recently released a blog on my 21 most favorite reads. I'm an avid reader of leadership and inspiration. So I do a monthly newsletter, and then as we mentioned, we do a weekly podcast, and then I do some social media. I have a young lady that does part-time work with me, and I do a success thought every morning, and then I do what I call a daily dose of leadership in the afternoon. So those are 2 consistent posts. And then because I'm an avid reader, I do a book recommendation every week as well. So follow me on I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and X and Instagram are my 4 main stations as far as that's concerned.
You don't. You're not idle that often. No.
We keep it moving.
What do you do for fun?
I love, I mentioned because your studio is really close to the tennis club of Rochester, where I'm a member for the last 6 years, and I picked up tennis later in life. So it's been good because I've been retired from coaching for 10 years, and I'm a very competitive person, so that has filled the void. So I get a chance. The biggest difference was in coaching basketball when we lost the game. I didn't get over it in 5 minutes. Now when I lose a tennis match, I'm mad for about 5 minutes, and then I move on in life. So that is the one difference. Is probably a positive for me.
Yes, that is very good. You're not stewing over that loss. Well, Coach, I really appreciate you taking the time. Glad we can make this happen, and I wish you all the best. And I hope people go. I'm looking forward to reading your books too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, Scott. It was a pleasure to be on your podcast.
.com